on campus. Let's get a big round of applause for the interns who are absolutely fantastic. If anybody's interested in knowing any more about our organization, you can go and approach one of the interns who have been going around and passing out raffle tickets and helping you out with stuff and ushering you in. You can go do that. So the way this whole entire thing is going to work is we're going to host what we always do, a once a month forum where we try to address topics of public concern. And we try to bring the students alongside faculty members and alongside public figures to discuss those things. This entire year, our topic has been the unknown future. We've looked at things like the future of education, the future of AI and technology, and tonight we're going to be looking at the future of the environment. We're specifically going to be talking about all of you because we're asking the question tonight whether Gen Z is going to be better or worse for the environment than past generations. So before we dive into that, we are going to bring on our guest speaker to give you a little bit of a basic idea of what this topic entails. I'm going to be interviewing him, but Avery's going to come on up and introduce him. So,
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Today we're going to welcome up Dr. Kevin Fitzsimmons for our guest speaker. A little bit about him. Dr. Fitz earned his undergraduate degree in ecology and evolutionary biology here at the UA, and then attended grad school in Florida. He returned to UA in 1981 working at the Environmental Research Lab. At the lab, he helped develop the Biosphere 2, leading the forming plans and helping to train the biospherians to feed themselves. He also helped develop the aquaculture display at the EPCOT Center at Disney World in Florida. Over the last 45 years, a common theme in Dr. Fitzsimmons' work has been improving the sustainability of aquaculture. Much of this occurred in developing countries working with tilapia, shrimp, and seaweed farmers and feed companies. He is aware of all kinds of research in improved farming, mining, transportation, and energy production. He is looking forward to hearing from you and discussing where the environment is headed today.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Dr. Fitzsimmons, for being here. We really appreciate it. I normally am dressed much more professionally than this, but for our Earth Day panel, we decided that we were all going to dress a little more kind of grungy and hippie-ish. So yeah, thank you for the flip-flops. So let's talk a little bit. What is it that got you interested in the environment in the first place to make it your entire professional career?
Certainly. So when I was in high school was when Jacques Cousteau was first becoming popular and doing his shows, weekly show on marine biology and studying the ocean and that kind of thing. And I just thought that was a really important topic. So that's why I started into environmental science. And then over here in BioEast, I was taking marine biology course, and the professor was talking about fisheries and pointing out, even back then, we had to quit hunting and gathering out of the oceans, that we needed to domesticate our seafood. And that just made such perfect sense to me, and that's how I got onto that track.
Excellent. And I mean, it's no secret that in the past few decades and past couple generations, there have been some alarming kind of things happening to our environment, right? But at the same time, also there have been a lot of kind of incredible innovations and solutions that we've been finding. So can you talk a little bit about if you had to kind of put your finger on it, what would you say is the biggest, like the most alarming thing that you've kind of seen in the past generation since you started your studying, and what's the biggest kind of innovation that makes you feel a little bit hopeful and a little optimistic?
Yeah, great question. And so, to me, climate change is overall the biggest issue that we've got today. There's been so much really positive progress on water pollution, air pollution, things like that were really critical when I was a student. It was kind of what everybody was talking about. It's amazing how much progress we have made on some of those topics. But climate change is just so big, and unfortunately, we've got people who deny it, claim it's a hoax, this kind of thing, that are putting us backwards instead of moving forward.
Do you see that is a global thing. We look at something like the Paris Climate Accord, and we do see a lot of countries, maybe across the globe, who are trying to put their best foot forward. I mean, do we see on the whole, like on net, are most of these governments, are most of these, are most of the planet, are people trying to make things right? Are we steering the ship in the right direction, or are most people kind of acting in bad faith?
No, I think the bad faith is a fairly small, well-to-do group, powerful people. I think when we look globally, I mean, even in developing countries, I have farmers tell me, oh, climate change has affected my yield. People that I'm not even sure knew what climate change would come up and say, oh yeah, this is an issue for me. So I think the vast majority of people have no qualms about it. They understand it, but it's just so much of the power structure are committed to keeping it going, unfortunately.
Why? Are they just terrible people, or like what's the what is the, why are the powers that be, why are the people who are that small contingent, who are the most powerful, so dead set on just
some of them are
fucking things up?
crooks, some of them are powerful people, but I assume some of them are good people. I won't say where I stole that from. No, and when I look at the number of people who've put solar panels on their houses, number of people who are doing EV cars and vehicles and planting trees and trying to restore mangroves. I mean, globally, there's so many people working on different aspects that I'm more of a glasses half full kind of person. But I get frustrated with the big players, kicking the can down the road.
So speaking of those big players, not to name any specific big player, but I mean, AI obviously is something that's sort of on the front of mind for everybody. I know that we always kind of talk about it, but certainly when it comes to the environment, we've heard both, hey, AI is going to solve this problem, it's going to address all these things, we're going to be able to find out scientific solutions to these issues that we've never seen before. We've also heard that AI data centers obviously use a lot of water.
Yep.
But can you talk about the two sides of that coin and where it is that
Yeah.
you see AI kind of taking us?
I don't think AI is going to solve it. I think it's going to be people who solve it. They may use AI as one of the tools, but there's going to be a whole lot more that are planting trees and putting up their solar panels and all these other things that AI can't do that. People have to do that. And luckily there are millions, if not billions, of people on the planet who get it and are trying to do their part, whether it's recycling or electrification, on and on. It's going to take virtually everybody to get on the bandwagon to solve this, because it is such a gigantic problem.
Do you, since we're talking about Gen Z tonight, talk to me a little bit about the interactions with your students. Do you, like, what's the, to use their favorite word, what's the vibe in your class right now? I mean,
Yeah.
do you feel, I mean, are you feeling good? You feel, I mean, what do we see?
I do feel good. I think the Gen Z, they get it. They understand that it's going to be all hands on board to solve it. I think they also recognize it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I think we're going to be, hitting 100 degrees in February and January here before it gets turned around, unfortunately, and that there's going to be water shortages, all kinds of issues, endangered species being lost. But I think we'll get over that hump, just like we got over the hump with a lot of air pollution and water pollution, things like that. But it's going to be a long slog.
And that's if we can band together, but that's a big if, which is exactly what we're looking at tonight.
Totally agree.
Well, luckily it is not that 130 degrees tonight. Luckily it's actually beautiful out. And so we'll all enjoy that night tonight. Any parting words that you want to give us before we start on our debate here?
Keep fighting the good battle.
Love it. Nice and concise. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'll hang around. Yeah.
All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. We have our guest moderator tonight. It's going to be really hard. Any of you who are in any of my classes know how difficult it's going to be for me to relinquish my role as moderator and now be a debater tonight, because I'm going to be debating with these guys over here. So Logan is going to be moderating for us tonight. Logan, you can go ahead and do your thing, and let's get a big hand for Logan. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Got my seat out and everything. All right, so here we are on Earth Day. This is an important event for all of us. Obviously, the environment affects everyone and everything. So we will be getting right off the bat with opening statements. Which side is going first? AJ, you are doing the opening statement? All right, for the affirmative, correct? All right, for the affirmative, we have AJ with his opening statement. Round of applause, everyone.
All right, everybody hear me? Cool. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here tonight. To our friends on the other side, to our moderator, and to our audience tuning in on live stream, thank you as well. Ladies and gentlemen, my partners, Hunter, Jackson, and I, believe that Gen Z will be the best generation for the climate so far in the United States. We are not arguing that Gen Z is perfect, nor that our generation has somehow solved climate change already. We are arguing something narrower and far more defensible, that no generation before ours has cared more about the environment or is doing more to force the institutions around it to take climate seriously. That is the standard that matters tonight. The best generation for the climate is not one that achieves perfection. It is the one that most clearly recognizes the problem and most powerfully shapes politics, culture, and behavior around addressing it. On that question, Gen Z, our generation, stands apart. First, our generation cares more. The Pew Research Center found that younger Americans, especially Gen Z, are more engaged with climate change, more likely to discuss it, and most likely to take action around it compared to older generations. Likewise, it has been found that Gen Z is the most likely generation to call climate change a crisis, with a whopping 1/3 of our generation agreeing with the sentiment. That is a profound shift, because older generations spent far too long trapped in the question of whether climate change was even real, whether it was exaggerated, whether it deserved serious attention at all. Gen Z has largely moved beyond that. For us, climate change isn't some distinct abstraction. It is part of the world we inherited, and that changes how seriously we take it. Second, that concern is not passive. In our generation, it becomes pressure. Again, Pew found that 32% of Gen Z had taken at least one concrete climate action in the previous year, whether it was by donating, volunteering, contacting our elected officials, or attending rallies. But that pressure is not only political, it is economic. First, Insight found that 62% of Gen Z shoppers prefer sustainable brands, and that 73% say that we are willing to pay more for brands that contribute to the environment. That matters because it means our generation is creating pressure on corporations from both directions, as citizens and as consumers. We are more willing to organize against companies that act irresponsibly, and more willing to treat environmental irresponsibility as a stain on a brand's reputation. Whether we are talking about Shine or any other company, built on sustainable overconsumption, the point is the same. Our generation is increasingly asking not only whether something is cheap and convenient, but what kind of world the company that makes it helps create, and whether it deserves to be rewarded with our wallets. Once that becomes normal, the corporations have to answer to it. But the deepest reason the truth lies on our side tonight is that Gen Z is changing the climate argument itself. For too much of recent American history, the divide was climate crisis versus climate hoax. It was whether there was even a problem at all. Our generation is increasingly moving beyond that dead end. Even where we disagree internally, the disagreement is more and more about method rather than denial. Is the answer solar and wind, or is it nuclear? Is it tighter regulation, or a more Roosevelt-style ethic of conservation and stewardship? Those are real disagreements, but they are certainly better disagreements, because they mean that the conversation in our generation is shifting from whether we preserve the climate to how we preserve it. And that is the point I want to leave you with. I myself am part of the 2/3 that would hesitate to use the word crisis. But hesitation over language is not the same thing as denial of the problem. Even those of us in Gen Z, like myself, who stop short of that word are still far more likely than previous generations to recognize the environment as a serious issue that demands a response. We talk about it more, we act on it more, we vote with it in mind more, and we spend with it in mind more. So even beyond the 1/3 that looks towards the clouds and sees a crisis, there is a much broader share of our generation that still sees a problem worth solving. And that alone puts Gen Z well ahead of generations that wasted decades arguing over whether the fire existed when the smoke was already filling the room we're all in. At the end of the day, the best generation for the climate is the generation that is most decisively moving the country towards responsibility. That generation, ladies and gentlemen, is our generation. That generation is Gen Z. Thank you.
All right, thank you, AJ. The prompt for tonight is Gen Z will be the best generation for the climate / environment. More than any other generation. We just heard AJ with the opening statement from the affirmative. We're about to get to the opening statement from the negative, but before that, just a reminder, you guys are gonna be determining who wins the debate tonight. At the end of closing statements, we will have you go on our Instagram and vote on a poll on our story. That's right, we're gonna make you follow us. So now with the opening statement for the negative of Gen Z will not be the best generation for the environment, we have Aylin.
I'm gonna come to the front because I don't like standing behind things. Okay. Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Great? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming. Thank you, AJ, for that lovely opening statement. Our side wants to start by acknowledging the particularly unfortunate task we have to perform tonight as the negative. Not only do we not get to offer you all the optimism that our opponents do, we have to make a case for an audience of mostly Gen Z members that Gen Z will not make things better. In other words, not only can the environment be saved, but to whatever degree it can be saved, Gen Z will not be its saviors. Now that sounds bleak and honestly a little insulting to a room full of Gen Z, me being Gen Z myself, but stay with us because that's not quite our claim. We are not doomed, even though, as we will point out, we've already crossed some thresholds from which there is no return. There is no reason to presume growing technologies won't address the environmental threats currently plaguing us. There's hope. Sorry, guys. It's very windy. There's hope. And we can see part of that hope does come from Gen Z. Roughly 82% of Gen Z expressed concerns about the state of the planet, according to Cadet International. 87% said that they believed companies have a responsibility to address environmental issues, according to the Future of Retail report. That is the good news. The bad news is that concern is not action. Awareness is not change. While our opponents point out two very promising examples of Gen Z activists pushing for, sometimes even achieving, policy shifts, the far more common lived experience of the average member of Gen Z does not demonstrate a move towards sustainability. Our argument splits Gen Z into three demographic categories. First, there are the Gen Zers with low environmental awareness. This basically means those who either don't know or don't care about their carbon footprint. Overconsumption is one of our generation's defining characteristics. Unfortunately, as 45% desire material goods as opposed to 34% of millennials and 30% of Gen X at the same age. Influencer culture doesn't just reflect this, it amplifies it, turning consumption into identity with little concern for the environmental impact. Now, as our opponents will surely point out, this isn't the majority, but it doesn't have to be. Even a subset of our generation that pushes back against our opponents' desire to paint Gen Z as this tree-hugging hippies intent on saving our planet is enough to slow any meaningful progress that they've done. Our second demographic, of Gen Zers we'll discuss are those with high level of environmental awareness, but for a variety of complex reasons, those environmental awareness does not parlay into actual lived behavior. While it is true that 62% of Gen Zers claim they want to use more sustainable products, and yet we are the number one user of fast industry, fast fashion, and on-demand everything. Our over-reliance on online shopping services like Amazon do not suggest a sustainable mindset. Amazon delivery has a significant environmental impact, primarily driven by rising carbon emissions from fast shipping, massive plastic packaging waste, and last mile delivery pollution. Shipping emissions increased by 75% between 2019 and 2024, according to Wired. Gen Z may say we want to be more sustainable, and we want sustainable retail and indulge in thrift cultures through secondhand sites like Poshmark and Depop. I love Poshmark. But according to McKinsey & Co., fast fashion companies like Shein, Temu, and others thrive on low prices and high overturn. Many clothes are now worn only 7 to 10 times before being thrown away. Who ever likes to rewear an outfit? I don't. And this isn't about hypocrisy. Thank you so much, Dad. You're so wonderful. It's about human nature. Convenience wins every single time. We are the most frequent user of food delivery apps, which not only increase plastic packaging, CO2 emissions, but food waste. As the first generation of the digital natives, we are the most common user of AI and predominantly digital spaces in general, which have a massive carbon footprint. AI alone is projected to consume a total of 12% of all the US energy in just the coming years. So here's a genuine question for all of you. When you leave here tonight, are you gonna stop using Amazon? Are you gonna stop ordering food online? Are you gonna stop relying on AI tools or any digital platform on your phone? Or does the convenience of these companies outweigh your concerns you might have? You are not a bad person if your answer is yes. You're just a person shaped by a system that was designed to make you rely on conveniences created by industry, which is exactly the problem. And that leads us to our final demographic of Gen Zers we'll discuss. The people who do align their values with action. Those with high levels of environmental awareness who truly do manifest that awareness into action. Members of Gen Z pushing for, writing, and enacting policy changes. But here's the uncomfortable question. Are they enough? Do they stand a chance against massive corporations with trillion-dollar incentives to maintain the status quo? Are the likes of BP and ExxonMobil in the fossil fuel industry, JPS and Wilmer International in agribusiness, Coca-Cola and Walmart in retail, or even OpenAI and Anthropic in tech? Are these companies likely to fold in the face of some very well-meaning but ultimately powerless members of Gen Z? Expecting Gen Z to overcome something like that is asking a group of hikers to push back a landslide with their bare hands. Their intentions are very good. Their effort is very real. But the scale is completely mismatched. I'll end by pulling the curtain back for just one moment. When the six of us first started planning this debate and brainstorming topics, one of the topics we floated was whether corporate influence would ultimately be more responsible for the fate of our planet or each individual's citizen's impact. All of us, including our opponents, decided to not go with that topic. Do you want to know why? Because corporate influence so obviously, objectively, inarguably outweighs any group of citizens' effort to do better. We love you, Gen Z, and we know all of our hearts are in the right place, but we're human, and our battle is a little too uphill to expect us to make it to the top. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Aylin, for delivering the opening statement, negating the prompt Gen Z will be the best generation for the environment. We're going to start with our second round now. There is going to be a dialogue. This will last for roughly 15 to 20 minutes. I will start off by asking our affirmative team a leading question, and then from there, I'm going to hand it off to you guys. So, touching on some things that Aylin just said, she said, despite Gen Z's awareness and their knowledge on the issue of the environment, we're still consuming Amazon, we're still consuming AI. I want to ask, is it Gen Z's responsibility to actually be the climate activists that they are and use those services less, or is it their responsibility to demand the government or corporations to enact more regulations and just be better entities, so to speak?
Thank you for the examples, and we absolutely agree that that is an issue. It is very wasteful to have a car drive 30 minutes or one way to deliver food. But a lot of the examples Aylin brought up were very isolated, sparse examples. Let's look at the broader trends of the issue. So when we look at Gen Z consumer reports from the Pew Research Center, up to 90% of Gen Z consumers report a willingness to pay more for sustainable products, and 50% of Gen Z workers prefer to work for companies that actually align with their values. That's a double-digit increase from previous generations, and this really shows the magnitude of how much climate really means to us as a generation.
Additionally, while yes, we are the generation that most uses AI and Amazon, we are also the generation that pushes the hardest against the environmental abuses that some of these corporations sustain. Take my hometown of Yuma, Arizona, not 3.5 hours west. Currently, there is plans to build 3 AI data centers. You want to know who the majority of the protesters against that are? The majority of people organizing in person, on social media, advocating on boards. It's Gen Z.
So I'm going to respond to Hunter. Henry, you're going to respond to AJ real quick. I mean, I just want to make sure that everyone keeps on being aware as we keep on hearing these statistics, especially from our opponents over and over again, that the words, they keep on using words like willingness and preference, right? Those, again, are mindsets, and we completely agree. We appreciate the fact that you're all very aware. Gen Z is very, very aware and willing to do these things. When asked on a survey, are you willing to do this, or do you prefer these things? It's one thing to answer that on a survey. It's an entirely another thing to look at what your lived action is. I don't really know what Hunter means when he says it's a small subset. I would imagine that the vast majority of you use Amazon on a regular basis or use food delivery apps on a regular basis. But Hunter, you can respond to that.
Yeah, sure, that's a great point. There's a difference between preference and actually what actually happens as a result. But we're already seeing that even corporations, as a result of Gen Z protests and pushing, are already moving in the direction of sustainability. Let's look at new energy generation. Energy, often emits the most emissions, right? That's a huge thing that we have to resolve. When we look at new energy products around the world, $2 trillion in 2024 went to clean energy and renewable sources. And 90% of new energy generated in 2024 was actually renewable. So as developing countries continue to develop and get more developed infrastructure, that is by and large going to be renewable. And that's because of Gen Z's pushback via protest.
All right, before we respond to that, I want to talk to AJ, my former partner. When I first moved down to Tucson, the Project Blue data center was being proposed, and the vast amount of Gen Z that came out and got that data center out of Tucson was a great thing to see, because I'm from Phoenix, and in the past 5 years, I've seen 4 Taiwanese semiconductor facilities and 2 AI data centers being built in my hometown with next to 0 Gen Z protests. And so that is a great example of Yuma and Tucson, but the most populous city in our state, hasn't done anything.
I also just want to touch on a little thing that you kind of talked about, Hunter. Those are like such great statistics, and we are not negating that. Not only does Gen Z not know about global warming, everything that has to do with the environment, as I'm sure all of you fully understand and are aware of what is happening in our earth and would love to do something about it. But those statistics that you just pointed at us, they don't map Gen Zers. Like, we are talking specifically about the Gen Z and how they are better than all past generations. I mean, if you want to jump back to, when there was nothing and they just made fire, like, that's the best generation. So, it's very hard to compartmentalize, especially when we have so much technology with all of you use. I use. We all use. So
let's dive a little bit more into Gen Z contribution. Let's look locally. The Arizona Youth Climate Coalition, they successfully authored and passed the Tucson Unified School District Climate Action Resolution, the first of its kind in the entire country. And it was just a group of students that drafted the entire thing, and it was passed by the city council. the policy mandates net zero emissions by 2040, 50% reduction by 2030, and the city of Tucson has already made highly meaningful progress towards achieving that. I bring that up just because it shows like the tenacity and drive and verve that Gen Z has to get these things done. And this is not an isolated thing. When you look at the progress of the EU achieving the Paris Climate Accords and how the emissions covered by that have reduced 35% since 2005, Gen Z is responsible for holding them accountable to that voluntary agreement. They're a big part of that voice.
And I want, sorry.
So I was gonna attach a question to that. We're talking about how Gen Z has all the right mindsets over here, but maybe that's not leading to any measurable outcome. Does the fact that much of Gen Z is still in school or is not maybe represented in the government, does that maybe give you pause that maybe within due time, that at some point, once Gen Z ages a little bit, we will get to a point where they're making these decisions in the halls of Congress or more active in protests?
Not necessarily. I mean, I want to talk about an economic theory, but also it really just kind of extends to sociology, called the collective action problem. One of the reasons why Gen Z might not necessarily be the generation who is better is actually paradoxically because of their awareness. What we see sometimes is what's called empathy fatigue, when all of you are so consistently bombarded with the idea that there is going to be a disaster, that there's so much, that you end up kind of experiencing kind of paralysis, where you don't really feel like there is anything that you can do. This was the second demographic that Aylin talked about before, where you go, not I'm a bad person and that's why I'm not doing anything, but I kind of can't do anything. And the collective action problem is when everyone agrees that there is an issue, everyone agrees that we should solve a problem, but there are too many people. The more people you add to the collective, it's harder to decide what the steps are to actually take to solve that problem. On a small scale, this is like when you and your friends decide, let's go do something tonight, but if there are too many of you, you can't decide what you want to do or where you want to go, what time to meet. But the more people you add onto that, it's really, really difficult to figure out what you're all going to do together. So, I mean, those small groups that Hunter's talking about can make those tiny dents. But as you get older, I do think that you're going to kind of go your disparate ways and not necessarily have a single solution. I mean, can you guys name who are the sort of like the leading groups of gigantic groups of Gen Zers who are burgeoning up to go and solve this problem? I mean, that's we don't really see that.
Well, I'm gonna take a moment to respond to the first point. I think Hunter might be better suited to name the actual groups. When it comes to decision paralysis, when it comes to empathy fatigue, this is on, right? Cool. When it comes to that, that's absolutely the case. Okay? The Russia-Ukraine war, I will note, has been going on for roughly 6 years now, and it's been mostly forgotten by a large part of Gen Z. Empathy fatigue is a chronic thing because of social media. However, there is a flip side of that, which is that the habits of climate conservation have been ingrained in since our childhoods so deeply that we are more likely to act on it. We are more likely to act on it personally. How many of us remember either ourselves or our classmates or our schoolmates generally walking out of class in middle school, high school, even elementary school to protest the climate vis-a-vis Greta Thunberg? How many of you remember your teachers talking from the earliest ages about conservation, about preserving water, about these climate issues, and ingraining these tiny little habits in you? Those tiny habits are the seeds of change that previous generations did not truly have.
One quick additional note I want to make. Let's look at Congress. How many people do you think in Congress are Gen Z? It's actually only 1 to 2 out of 450. I am really concerned that Ted, Aylin, and Henry so confidently say that we can't address this issue when we're just barely getting started. We're just stepping in to positions of power. That hopelessness and lack of optimism in our generation and our drive that we've already demonstrated is really sad, to be honest with you.
If I can respond to AJ's point real quick, he wants to talk about habits, but if we're going to talk about habits, let's go to Amazon and Amazon spending habits. Gen Z had a 26.8% increase in per user spending by on Amazon alone in 2025. The next highest was baby boomers with less than half of an increase.
Jackson, go ahead, and then I have another question.
I think we're generalizing the deficiencies of, Gen Z as a whole, and I think we should isolate, Gen Zers into like representative groups that are incorporated in prevention. that are incorporated in professions that lead to high impact change. You know, so the focus of my argument are Gen Zers who are incorporated in, you know, technological innovation, specifically startup groups. And there's been a measurable growth in Gen Zers working on environmental innovation. And if this trend were to continue, Gen Zers will be disproportionately represented in these, you know, startups. And startups over the course of the last 2 decades have been proven to be a primary driver of environmental technology that leads to measurable improvements in, you know, carbon emissions.
I
And
actually just, go ahead.
Sorry.
We want to phrase that into a question for you as well. So going
And
off. Oh, please continue.
This was touched on before, and I feel like you suggested data that there haven't been really any improvements in the last 10 years, but I feel like the lack of improvement statistically and Gen Zers being the best group for environment, I don't think those two statements are mutually exclusive. You know, I feel like an improvement in the conditions by which the environment itself may improve is an improvement nonetheless. So the improvements that lead to the conditions that mitigate the environment, that mitigate the adversive conditions, are improvements nonetheless. So although the needle may not improve, it may not move, you know, it's slowing the degradation of the environment. So we may not see on paper, like statistically, an improvement in the environment itself, but we can see a slowness in the degradation of the environment.
I'm not quite sure if I caught everything that you just kind of went over, because that was like 40 points, but just to kind of talk about, you know, the future of Gen Z, of like working injured. I have not mentioned this, but I'm an environmental science major. So my future, I would love to be an environmental science consultant. And if you guys know what that means, it's basically I would be hired by a company to make them more sustainable. That sounds great. That sounds amazing. I'd be helping my environment. I'm literally for that side. Except the only way that I would be able to get hired by a company is if they're doing something wrong and they don't want to get taxed immensely by the government. So I would only be in a job if they weren't getting in trouble. So it just kind of shows of that perpetuated thing of like, oh, maybe they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart, but just to make money.
So just real,
I'd be psyched to hear Hunter's question from before.
real quick before we get to the question and response, I was going to ask. I feel like we've been skirting around this a little bit. What do both sides think is the best way to achieve any kind of climate result in terms of it, you know, getting measurably better? Is it through the government? Is it through activism? You know, which of the three? And go ahead and answer that question. Then you can follow up with your own question and whatever.
Yeah, I'd like to take that first. We all agree that that governmental regulation and restriction on companies which are actively damaging our environment, such as BP and ExxonMobil, would be by far the best way to get a control over the environment and improve our climate.
For our side, we acknowledge that there is a fantasy of history which says that the working man shall rise up and that the grassroots organizations will come and take power and everything will be fixed. Historically, we know this isn't true. However, those who are most passionate, the loudest 5%, are going to take power. The loudest 5% are going to raise awareness. They are going to fight corporations. They are going to take power in the government. Laymen have a responsibility to be more environmentally conscious, and that is a small part of it. But what we look forward to and what we hope for, because hope is a virtue, is that those 5% will rise into positions of power in government and in advocacy and force the changes that we're beginning to see, with corporations beginning to shift towards EV fleets like Amazon, with the government putting regulation, with the government stripping some regulation on nuclear so we can have better renewable energy. If that 5% rises up with our support, we have a path forward.
That actually fits great into the question I was going to ask
thank
earlier,
you.
too.
I want to turn this more into a dialogue than just us monologuing at each other.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah. So, Aylin, you're a fellow environmental science major here myself. I want to be an attorney. It's great. Yeah, it's a great cause. I absolutely agree. AJ mentioned, like, we're going to be part of that 5%, right? Who's going to be working to improve the environment. In your own words, though, you said that remediating climate change is, quote, pushing back a landslide with our bare hands. What's the point of even going into that field in the first place if you don't even think you can make a meaningful difference? Doesn't that make you feel existential at all?
No, so actually, thank you so much for that question. I grew up really liking the environment. I took an environmental science class in high school, and I want to be the change. I want to see it. But, you know, as you quoted me, as I said so amazingly, I can't myself with my bare hands push back a landslide. Will myself, being an environmental science major, of what I care about, help? Sure. But will an entire demographic of group, which all of the data shows no, we won't? But that doesn't mean that I can't help. That doesn't mean me and myself and myself as a person can't be. I really do love the environment. I really do want to help. Does that mean every single Gen Zer will be the same? No.
And just be clear, I mean, we're not doom and gloom over here. We actually have a lot of hope for Gen Alpha. We have a lot of hope for the generation coming up after this because we are able to start to have those conversations. But I mean, we're just pointing out that the actual lived habits of Gen Z can sometimes be a little contradictory to what we're talking about.
I'm gonna let affirmative respond, and then we'll move to audience questions. So start thinking about when you want to ask our 6 people up here.
One final note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that tonight we're not asking whether Gen Z will be perfect, we're asking if we will be the best. Maybe it is true that we are putting 2 hands against a landslide and expecting it to stop, but it is better than the generations that came before us that simply stepped aside and let it sweep them out.
I mean, nor are we saying that Gen Z is not going to do shit. We're just saying that that there are.
All right. I said audience questions now. All right, lovely man in the black shirt, Jacob. What is your question? Shout it out me. I'm deaf, and I'll repeat it with the mic.
My question goes to the negative, that if Gen Z is not the best for the climate out of past generations, what generation would be?
Yeah, so I'll repeat so our live stream can hear, and anyone in the back has worse hearing than me. If Gen Z is not the best generation for the environment, then which generation was?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jacob. Thank you. And while we do have hope for the future generations, as Ted mentioned, as of right now, it was the silent generation. The silent generation produced only 6.3% greenhouse gas emissions from their diet. Meanwhile, both Gen Z and millennials produced about 7%. So that would be the generation that has done the best so far.
That is.
Dan.
Quick, very, very quick response, and we'll go to another question if there's one.
Okay, all we're going to say is remember what the topic is. It is, will Gen Z be better for the environment than past generations? And ultimately, all signs and trends are pointing in that direction. I already mentioned the energy transition happening around the world, of there being a strong incentive to transition to renewable energy. That's the biggest source of emissions and ultimately climate change. A lot of that is driven, again, by Gen Z protests. So the question is, are we going to be better than past generations? Absolutely. We're already showing that we are. And that's what the whole topic is.
Also, ladies and gentlemen, pardon my French. The silent generation may not have been the generation that started sliding down the slippery slope of climate change, but they sure as hell helped build it.
Can I respond to Hunter real quick?
Better be 15 seconds or less.
Sounds good. Okay. Hunter, you said that, you know what? Actually, audience questions fine.
You were up on time anyways. All right, any other questions? Yes, Hayden.
This is for both sides, but what do each of you do to contribute to this topic?
Yeah, so what did they each do to contribute to the topic?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, for both sides, the question is, what did each of you do to contribute to this topic?
I'm assuming. Oh, you want to go down the line?
You guys want?
Okay. My dad and my mom, my stepmom, are both in the environmental world. My dad is an environmental lobbyist, like Hunter maybe wants to be, tangentially related. And so what I do is I barely use my car, and I ride my bike as much as possible.
Well, as I said, I'm an environmental science major, so a lot of stuff that I've learned in my core classes besides like, you know, when you were taught in like school like to take shorter showers or to like use that reusable water bottle. I've actually been working with a couple of my professors to go over how to make more things biodegradable concerning certain plastics that we use everyday life. So.
Just to keep in mind that this is a debate, I mean, I'll say that, I mean, I walk to school every day, but you know what I also do most nights? Get DoorDash. You know what I do most days? Get Amazon. We ordered a lot of the stuff for this event from Amazon. So, I mean, it's clear that we are all doing our part to Hayden's point, but we're also doing just as much to kind of do damage to there. So.
Yeah, this is what I'm going to dedicate my life to. I'm going to be an environmental attorney back in my home state of Montana, and hopefully a Montana State representative as well. I've done a lot of work on campus on this. I'm about to publish a publication on the impacts of like roadside pollution, like tire treads and things like that on the environment and human health. I've run a lot of service projects on eliminating invasive species in the community as well. And just the energy I feel from those who volunteer and who take leadership alongside of me fills me with so much hope and gratitude for the future. And if Gen Z isn't better than previous generations, then we lose hope. We can't lose hope.
I shop at Goodwill and walk to class.
I am not nearly as impressed as my friend Hunter over here, but the majority of the clothes I wear, including the ones you see on my body right now, are secondhand. So that's what I try to do.
I did nothing. Any one more question, if we have any. TED students, come on, this is your time to speak up. You're all boring if you don't. All right, Avery, go ahead.
Okay, for the NAG, I feel like you guys talked a lot about how Gen Zs get lost in trends and influencers, and you're kind of just born into this wave of whatever fast fashion, all that kind of stuff. Do you think, like, coming into the future, you know, kind of our guest speaker talked about it's going to get worse before it gets better. As we, like, continue to take on this pressure, do you think we're going to be able to change that status quo?
Yeah, so just to repeat, Avery asked about how trends and how, you know, our guest speaker came up and said it's going to get worse before it's going to get better. Just to kind of rephrase that, like, is it going to get better after it gets worse?
I mean, that depends. I mean, as Dr. Fitzsimmons said, I mean, it depends on if we're all going to be able to band together to be able to do this. I think what we're pointing out is that it's really difficult to be able to do that, to have a coherent narrative, to be able to lock arms to do that, especially in the face of corporations. I know that our opponents keep on trying to say that we're being real doom and gloomers and that we have lost hope, and we're not saying that at all. We're simply saying that on net, in comparison with other generations, it's just harder for you, Gen Z, to be able to fight back and to be better than your elders. That's all that we're saying.
I mean, I just want to reiterate my question of you know, as much as we come, you all are here to listen about a very important topic that we all know is so important. How many are you still going to use Amazon? And it's not your fault. It's not you. It's literally the industry, and that's the entire problem that we have.
All right, excellent. That is going to conclude. I'm going to give you the same rule I gave Henry, 15 seconds.
Yeah, make it short, St. Thomas Aquinas.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, hope is a virtue, and yes, it will get worse before it gets better. It'll get worse because right now we are in a phase where the older generations are beginning to phase out of politics, and we are beginning to phase in. And as we phase in, we will get better because, as St. Thomas Aquinas tells us, Ted, hope is eternal. Hope is a virtue, and we must maintain it. Thank you.
And on that note, round of applause for round 2 of the dialogue. Thank you, everyone up here. All right, before we get on to the closings, Abby is making the poll for you guys determining who will win and lose. As soon as the last word of the closing statement is uttered, that poll will be live, and you all will be having the opportunity to vote on that. But before then, you should all have cards with the Instagram, right? Okay, cool. If not, just Google it. Closing off on the affirmative side, we have Hunter with his closing statement.
Before I begin, this is going to be my final debate after a 7-year debate career, and I wouldn't have wanted to end it any other way. So, thank you all so much. When I started to understand climate change more deeply, I felt hopeless. The environment, something that I cherished so deeply, felt like it was slipping away, and I believed that there was nothing that I could do about it. The day I graduated high school, I remember sitting with one of my favorite teachers, Mr. Edward. I asked him how he could keep going when the problems we were studying felt so vast and overwhelming. He handed me a book, Factfulness by Hans Rosling. And in that book, there's a line that stayed with me. Remember, things can be bad and getting better. Rosling helped me see that I'd been treating the future as something already decided, when in reality, people like Gen Z are still shaping it. To all of us here today, I want you all to remember this. Meaningful climate action depends on Gen Z being more effective than the generations that came before us. I understand why it's tempting to believe that things are too far gone, or that only Gen Alpha will be able to save us. I felt that myself, but it's not the full picture. There have been many moments in history where the situation seemed just as overwhelming. The ozone layer was deteriorating at a rate that alarmed scientists around the world, and coordinated global action led to its measurable recovery. Acid rain once devastated entire ecosystems, and policy interventions reduced the emissions that caused it, allowing forests and lakes to begin healing. Those outcomes happened because people refused to accept that that trajectory was fixed. Gen Z is already reshaping the world around us in real time. We are pushing school districts to adopt climate action plans. We are organizing, voting, and showing up in spaces where decisions are made. We're also directly changing the markets. Companies that ignored sustainability, like Shein, as we mentioned throughout this debate by Aylin and AJ, are already changing their business models due to Gen Z pressure. For example, Shein has introduced a $50 million textile waste management fund, and they're also transitioning to small-scale manufacturing to vastly reduce their human rights abuses. This happened because our generation is willing to stand up, to call out greenwashing, and to withdraw support from these companies until they change. And the best thing of all is that Gen Z is only just getting started. So when Ted, Aylin, and Henry say that corporations are too powerful, or that it is too late for Gen Z to be more powerful than previous generations, they're missing something fundamental. Power is only stable when people continue to give it legitimacy, and Gen Z is actively withdrawing that legitimacy from these unsustainable systems. The most dangerous thing that we can do is assume that the ending has already been decided. And for many members of Gen Z like myself, too much is at stake to give up on our generation being the best. I'll close with a personal story. I was journeying on a trail called the Beaten Path, deep in the Beartooth Mountains in my home state, Montana. The earth was worn by years of footsteps, and the air carried that quiet weight you only notice when you finally slow down. I was walking with my brother, Jordan. We'd not been close for quite a long time. He'd gone off to college, and our lives had started to move in different directions. For months before, my persistent depressive disorder had overwhelmed my life, and I could no longer drown out the darkest thoughts in my head. I was bedridden, missing work and class, shutting people I loved out of my life, watching everything that I cared about slowly fall out of reach. I felt completely alone. I remember lying there thinking about how far I drifted from the person that I wanted to be, not realizing that no one was going to come and fix it for me. But on that trip in the Beartooth Mountains, something changed. Jordan and I stopped and just existed in the landscapes that lay before us. For the first time in a long time, I felt grounded. I was at peace. And in that stillness, we found our way back to each other. That environment gave me something to hold on to when I felt I had nothing left. That is what we were talking about protecting in today's debate. As a future environmental attorney, I will fight to the very end for what saved my life. And I know I'm not alone in that. Gen Z carries these stories, these connections, these reasons to care, and that is why I will not walk away from this fight. Because when something has the power to bring you back to yourself, you don't give up on it. And when the future is still being written, no matter how uncertain it might seem, the only choice to carry humanity forward is hope. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Hunter. Again, the prompt is Gen Z is the better or will be the better generation for the environment. Before we get to the final statement of the final event of the semester, our panelists will be up here taking your questions if you want to come up and ask them, and Ted will be up here if you want to join the internship, so stick around. All right, and now for the negative, we have Henry with the closing statement.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Hunter, for that great closer. And I would like to thank all of you here tonight, and thank you to our opponents as well, for a very passionate debate. Tonight, we have all thought critically about the environment, but of course, we have also considered responsibility. Our opponents, on one hand, have argued that the push towards renewable energies has been a great thing for the environment. But they have failed to mention that in order to get that transition from baby boomers to Gen Z, they must first pass through Gen X and millennials, who have been making that push instead of our generation. They have also argued that our generation has gained significant eco-consciousness and that change will occur because of it. And they mentioned that we will create new technologies and laws that we agree on. However, we admire their view, but we disagree that protests and reposts translate into change. That's not the way that the world works. In the real world, the one that we have laid out tonight, companies do not simply respond to consumer behavior. Rather, they shape, monetize, and normalize it. They make excess normal. They make convenience necessary. They make restraint inconvenient, expensive, and unrealistic. We respect our opponents' intentions, but we believe that our view is the more honest one that recognizes that Gen Z is not failing because it lacks morals, but because it has inherited a marketplace designed to make the unsustainable living ordinary. We argue that there are three groups. The first are those with low environmental awareness. The second, people with high environmental awareness whose actions still do not align with their values. Not because they're hypocrites, but because they're human. And then there's the third group, the Gen Zers who truly do live their values. However, the question that our opponents and us have argued over tonight is not whether groups of Gen Z will be better for the environment, but Gen Z as a whole. And our opponents have failed to answer whether that small group is enough to overcome fossil fuel companies, fast fashion giants, agribusiness monopolies, retail behemoths, and tech firms with billions and trillions of dollars invested in preserving the status quo of harming our environment. We do not believe that they are. Not because our generation is weak, but because the scale is completely mismatched. As someone who was born in the halfway mark of Gen Z, I'm sure many of us here are as well informed about the state of the climate right now, just as I'm well sure that most of us in this room hold at least one habit we know is unsustainable. I myself, despite being raised by an environmental lawyer and an energy consultant, shop at Amazon, and I work with AI for my job. The truth tonight, no matter how large the group of our generation that attempts to live sustainably is, they will forever be outmatched, whether by the other Gen Zers who don't care or don't have enough freedom to change their habits, or by corporations who in the pursuit of profit turn sustainable practices into a front for pollution-driven products. We believe that the people are powerless in the face of such structural inequalities, and that is something that AF has not refuted. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Henry. And with that, the event is over. So now at this point, you all should have the opportunity to go on our Instagram and vote for who you think won. If you do not have the QR code, it is UA Discourse Series. Yeah, thank you all for a wonderful and a raffle.
Oh, yeah, wait, come here, Grace.
My bad.
Vote, just vote, just vote. Okay. Shake it. Yeah. Shake it. Go. How many are we doing? 2 or 3? Turn on.
If anyone is confused on where to go, it is on our Instagram story. There is a poll on our Instagram story so you can vote. Please vote if you've been here, and please follow us if you like this event and want to see more, or if you want to join the internship.
Okay. Hi guys. Okay. The first one is 166097. Okay.
Rigged.
Okay.
I finally won after 4 years.
There's one more. It's not right. Okay. Wait, is this 166090. There we go. Got a winner. Okay, I'll just come to you guys. Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
Keisha.
Our
All right, and do we have our
I'm
winner?
getting that. Our debaters have been dealing with wind, have been dealing with the intermittent 15-minute clock chime. How about a round of applause for them? They've been putting a lot of preparation into this, and they delivered an amazing performance. Do we have the numbers of who won? Hello, Abby. Okay, make your way up here. We do have a winner. This is a democracy, right, guys?
Okay, so the winner of tonight's debate is the negative. It is 64% to 36%.
And despite that, we all hope you demand better of our corporations and our government.
Absolutely. We love you all. Thank you very much. Come and talk, ask us questions if you need to. There's more pizza if you need any more pizza. Go say hi to Cosmo if you need to say hi to Cosmo.
Okay.
I'll see you guys all soon.
Okay. Woo!
No, don't be. He's literally the cutest thing I've ever seen.
We're working on fighting.
Oh, it doesn't even hurt.
Okay.
Sorry, he was like
No, it's just
attacking you.
I saw him at Regents. He was so cute. Well, actually, oh, we should ask him.
Hi, buddy. I know, leave people alone. Sorry.
Hi, Cosmo. Oh, you do? What color? They're pretty cool. I get why people are so.
I do.